Hello and welcome to African Perspective, the program that looks at stories on the continent. I'm Aldrin Simpier. Tonight, is closure possible? 26 years since the end of apartheid in South Africa, we speak to a widow whose husband was killed by apartheid operatives. And then, should South Sudan really look to South Africa as it starts its peace transition? The chairperson of the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan, Yasmin Suka, will give us her perspective. We also love to hear your perspective. Send us your questions and comments to @AfricanPerspec1 on Twitter. But first, we start here. South Sudan is finally trying to undo many years of conflict that has claimed thousands of lives. The new coalition government is ready to hit the ground running, but there's a warning from the chair of the African Union's Commission on Human Rights of South Sudan. Yasmin Suka has called on accountability for violations which happened on the continent. She says Africa should also consider using South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission process to address challenges in countries that have experienced conflict. Not mincing her words on the action needs to be taken against perpetrators who did not seek amnesty. Suka says forgiveness cannot override justice.
Africa, a continent still dealing with effects of colonialism and apartheid, most victims being women and children. In South Sudan, thousands have been displaced while many others have been killed due to internal conflict. On Saturday, the announcement of a new government brought renewed hope to millions of South Sudanese, but the scars of war remain.
It's important really for the leadership of the African continent to begin to think about accountability. Many of them argue that peace should come first and justice afterwards. And what we have said constantly in our reports and our statements is that peace and justice are the opposite sides of the same coin.
At the same time, there is a call for perpetrators of apartheid to be held accountable for the atrocities committed against the black majority during the oppressive regime. She also had strong words for apartheid President F.W. de Klerk.
When you have someone like Mr. de Klerk begin with his denial, I am not surprised, of course, because when I look at his engagement with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in his first submission, he talked about apartheid being wrong, but his apology was qualified to what he called those who bona fide believed that the state was giving these orders. And he also said that my state has never been responsible for extrajudicial killings, for torture, abductions, etc. In his second submission, he makes exactly the same point that he made in his first statement, where he said that apartheid was not a crime against humanity, and in fact, this was the mobilization of the ANC with its communist partners that gave rise to the resolution in the General Assembly. This is absolutely a denial of what happened in South Africa. The fact that his state became, after 1980, a criminal state in which they set up death squads to take out anybody who they considered to be an opponent of the apartheid state. So teachers, for instance, when you look at Matthew Ganiwe and Fort Kalata, what reason can you have for eliminating them? And that is why it's critical that the NPA does its job, begins to indict these people who are still alive, so we can look at Mr. de Klerk and his colleagues' command responsibility for these crimes.
De Klerk has since retracted his statement, sending an apology through his foundation. Sophie Mkwena, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And it's been 26 years since democracy in South Africa, and old wounds have been opened. There's been a public outcry over the last apartheid president F.W. de Klerk's denial that apartheid was a crime against humanity. Although the former president's foundation has retracted the statement, there are now questions over whether justice did prevail under the democratic dispensation. Joining me now in studio to have this conversation is Kala Mutau, whose husband, MK soldier Peter Mutau, was killed by apartheid operatives in 1987. Good evening and welcome to African Perspective.
Good evening, and how are you?
I am good, and it's very lovely to have you in studio and have this chat with you again.
Thanks so much. And
Let's
Thank you
take
to
a
have
few
me
steps
around.
back. 1987, where were you at the time when you got the call?
I was in Mozambique. Let me go back because, you know, for me to be in Mozambique, let me go back
Okay.
to explain why I was in Mozambique at the time. After the Nkrumah Accord in 1984, the Mozambican government, because of the signing of the accord, it was that every ANC member should leave Mozambique. That was the pet of the accord, Nkrumah Accord, and we were taken out. Comrades were sent to Lusaka, others were sent to Tanzania. And with me, it was a comrade that came with a list that wanted me to go to Tanzania. But I spoke to my husband, and my husband said, no, it was not. How could they separate us, take me to Tanzania? And he said, I had to go to Swaziland, and I jumped the fence with my 2 babies and joined him in Swaziland. But things got a bit rough, from 84, things really got very, very tough. And de Kock and others came to my house on the, I think it was the 18th of August, 86, if I'm not mistaken, And they raided my house and they tied me up and in the toilet.
Would this be, is this in South Africa or is it
in Swaziland? Sorry,
in Swaziland,
I'm so
okay.
sorry. It was in Swaziland. And after that incident, I felt that I was not safe, and I went back to Mozambique. And that was on the 17th of January. It was my husband's birthday. He was turning 32. We went back to Mozambique. And I stayed in Mozambique for that time, and he used to come and go back to Swaziland for his ANC work that he was doing. And the last time I saw him, it was in June. He came in June to see me. But on that day that was killed, that was on the, no. Before that, the night before, he was killed. That was on Wednesday, the 8th of July. Comrade Cassius Maki was at my mom's place, where we used to get his calls, because at the time was no cell phones and only the landline. And I spoke with him, and he said to me that he would be out of town, and he would call my parents and let me know when to come and get his call. And that was my last time I spoke with him. And the following day, I had gone to the saloon. And as I was in the saloon, I had this feeling, something that, was not right. I felt like something was disconnected from me, I don't know. And I even commented to the ladies from the salon that, I was just out of nowhere, I didn't feel well. In the evening, there's a comrade called Mdu that came to the house and told me that 3 people were shot in Swaziland. And I even said to him that, I've got a feeling since at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that something had gone wrong. And I said to Mdu, I think Paul is one of them. And he said to me, no, don't go that far. I don't think it's him. But I said to him, no, I've got a feeling. It took like 2 days, and it was hell. For me, it was hell, because you have that feeling that something is wrong. And from that time, now I believe that when they said if someone dies in your family, you got that feeling. And on a Saturday, I was listening to the radio. Was when they said that one of the people that were killed in Swaziland was holding a Lesotho passport. And the minute they said that, I knew that it was him, because I knew that it was using a Lesotho passport. It's 33 years now. But each time you talk about it, it takes you back to that day. It's a pain that I don't think it will ever go away. I don't think it will ever go away. Because I think it's because this thing has never been dealt with correctly, maybe. We've never had counseling. We've never had, I don't know, even if reparation will help, I don't know. But is that there's that pain that, you know what, with me, I always say to people that, you know what, my pain is a pain that, you know what, it's a soul that, you know, only has the crust or whatever you call it, but it's so thin. That, you know, anything that touches it can bleed again, and that's how I feel. I don't know, others might feel different because, you know what, we deal with our pain in different ways, but with me, it's a pain that I don't think will ever go away. Maybe because I did not have the right counseling. You know what, my husband left me with 2 small children. And you know what, I never had, I think, a structure, you know, to help me during that time. It was like my kids, it was my kids were the only thing that, you know, for me to survive, for me to live. It was like looking at my children and always be afraid that, you know, if anything happens to me, what was going to happen to my children. I think that's the only thing that I had at that time to hold into it to give me reason to live.
How old were they at the time?
My son was 7, my daughter was 4.
Were you able to explain to them what happened?
No, I could not. At that time, I think they were too young to explain. But, you know, at the moment, you know, I suffer with especially with my son. You know, my son is going for 40, but my son is a child with so much anger. You know, I wish my son could get help because, you know, he has so much anger, and, you know, he takes that anger onto me. You know, the time that, you know, I feel that, you know, it is like, you know, he blames me not to have a father, you know.
Has he ever vocalized this?
Not in a way, you know, but I feel that way. You know, it's like, you know, he takes he's a very angry man, very intelligent, but, you know, the anger that he has, it's just too much,
Do you think that the root of that anger is because of his father's death?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And sometimes when you go through pictures of him with your son, I don't know if you guys even have those moments.
No, at the moment we don't do that. But as earlier age, we used to. You know what? But I think my children have... I think also the way, you know what, we came into the country, the way that we're not even, you know, as I can say, you know what, my kids have suffered a lot because, you know, even they saw the way, you know what, the way I was treated, you know what, and even them, you know what, not to have support, you know, maybe even with me it's even worse because, you know what, and maybe there are other people like me, I don't know. You know, being a foreigner, I don't know, all those things, I don't know, maybe. But, you know, especially my son is a very, very, very bitter. He has a he's so angry. And that anger, you know, affects all of us. Yeah, it affects him, it affects all of us,
What do you think the answer could be? What do you think should happen to help you, your children as well, to actually find that closure, and especially probably your son now, as you speak of him, that he has that innate anger that he carries?
I think, you know what, for some of us, you know what, I think that, you know what, I had not a long discussion with De Kock, because De Kock was one of the person that came to my house in '86. De Kock is the man that put a silence on my head, you know what.
A gun?
Yes, on my head when he came to my house in Swaziland, and he told me that, you know, he could shoot me anytime, you know what, because he was looking for my late husband, and my late husband was not in the house. It was the day after some comrades were jumping the fence and were killed because I cannot call him a comrade. September, that was part of his machinery, was kidnapped. And he gave all the information, and there were few comrades that were jumping, they were crossing the border to South Africa that night, that my husband has taken them to the border to cross. Only one comrade survived. He was even in Robben Island, Comrade Mhlaba, but the rest were killed. And in the morning, they arrived in my house, and my husband had come very early hours of the morning. And I told him that the comrade that was also killed in Swaziland, Viva, had come to the house to tell me that September was kidnapped. And I said to him, you better get out of the house. And because September was kidnapped. And he said, but no, he won't say anything. And I said to him, I even used Che Guevara. There's not many Che Guevaras, you know. I don't trust anyone, you know. And as soon as he left, it was about not even an hour this guy just barged into my yard with 2 cars. It was a Land Rover, a Land Cruiser, white Land Cruiser, and a yellow Golf, Chico, I think Chico, whatever thing. And they just pulled into the driveway. And you know what, me being me, you know what, I think God has blessed me that, you know,
did you fear death at all at the time?
When I'm in a very dangerous situation, I become so calm. And I even went to open the door for them.
But yeah, you had 2 children.
You know, my kids were not in the house. We had gone to crash.
Yeah.
And what they did when they went to the house, they locked me in the they asked me about my husband. He had put a silence on my head, and I said to him he had, I don't know where he is since last night. And I think he might have bought it because he knew that, you know what, he had taken these people to cross, and maybe that's why he bought it. That, you know what, I said that he left last night.
Yeah.
But he had left in the morning.
Okay. So in South Africa, what we've done is that we had the TRC Commission, and submissions were made to the TRC Commission. Are you satisfied?
No, I'm not satisfied. I'm not satisfied because, you know what, as I said, I met de Kock. It was during the process of the TRC, and we had gone to Pretoria to court.
So you met him again?
I met him that time.
Yeah.
After the incident in Swaziland, I met him. And we spoke. We spoke, and I asked him a few questions. But I wish I could ask him even more. You know,
What are some of those questions?
I wanted to know, you know what, I wanted to know what happened to my husband. You know what, I wanted to know what they did to him. Because, you know what, he was killed. Yes, I know that he was killed. I know that, you know what, they pumped 7 bullets into his body. The undertaker said that, no, he was not just killed straight away. He was like, you know what, each bullet that they were pumping into his body, they were torturing him, kicking him, and you know what, I would like to have that closure. You know what, I would like someone to tell me his last moments.
Do you think that's something that your son yearns for as well?
I don't know. But with me, I think, I don't know. It might help, it might not help, but I wish I could have that moment. You know what, I miss him. You know, there's no, you know what, as I always say to people, that not each step of my life, I miss him. I have my children, you know what, they went to school, they went to graduate, I missed him. I had my first grandchild, I missed him. I have my other grandchildren, I miss him. As I said, that, you know what, it is 33 years this year on the 9th of July, and I don't think that wound will ever go away.
Do you sometimes at all sit and think about, would Peter think that I, as a strong-willed woman that he knew, may have failed him in finding exactly out what happened on that day?
He might, I think so. Maybe because, maybe that's why I haven't given up. That pain hasn't closed. Maybe it's because I think that, you know what, I haven't managed to get to the bottom. Because, you know what, another thing that, you know what, our government has failed us, let me say it, is the people that, you know what, sold our loved ones. My husband was not, my husband was given, you know, on a silver platter to the Boers, you know, by a woman called Nanike, you know. And this woman, you know what pains me most? I don't want to lie to South Africans. I don't want to lie to my ANC comrades. What pains me most, you know, is to see, you know, them embracing this woman in gatherings, ANC gatherings, in front of me. You know what? And I ask myself, but you know what? Is it because you never lost anyone? How can you embrace someone that, you know what, we all know that, you know what, she was...
Why do you say that she was the one who handed over
Yes,
your husband?
She was. Even when Viva was killed, the Swazi government did say to the ANC people that she was the one in the scene of the accident, the first person. De Kock told me, you know what, I'm not talking something that, you know what, we knew it. She was even arrested. She went to Quatro in Angola, and after that she came out. But... De Kock told me that she was on the payroll of the Flag Plus Command. Flag Plus, yeah. It's not my dream. I'm not dreaming. I'm not Lento. Nanik gave my husband on a silver platter. And the ANC is not doing anything about these people. You know what?
No.
Where's the justice for us? You know what? Where's the justice for us when we know that, you know what, these people were working for the enemy, and you know what, and today they eat and they sleep with us? You know, it's okay. Maybe, you know what, I can say, I can forgive the cock. He was my enemy, you know what? But for the one that, you know, pretend to be an ANC member, you know, and we know that, you know what, this person was a double agent, you know what, and there we are, you know what, I go to functions, ANC functions, and I meet this person, and other ANC people are embracing these people, knowing that, you know what, I'm right there. You know what, I've lost a husband, I lost the father of my children, and I'm not the only one, you know. It's Cassius Maki's wife, Nozipo. Nozipo also was left with 2 children, you know, the same age of mine, you know. And there's another woman, the Mozambican woman, she left 3 children, you know what? And, you know, I think the ANC, you know, must think about us. You know, how do you feel? You know what? There's something that, you know, they can never bring back to us.
Yeah.
But, you know what? The only thing that, you know, I think that they should have is to be a bit sensitive.
Yeah.
You know, that, you know what? There are people that they know they know how to do it. Double agents, and they know it. You know what? Why do they embrace them in front of us? Why do they, you know what?
Do you at all think,
like they're glorifying them? Yeah.
do you at all think that there should be a twofold process, that while you have probably an inquiry that's run by the government, but even from the ANC itself, within the party itself, there should be that process of healing, but that process of healing must also be a process of being honest to say that this happened, that happened, and this happened, and also taking into consideration the submissions made by the former president, President Jacob Zuma, at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry, because that was one of the reasons or the moments that you got triggered.
It really triggered me so much. It triggered me that, you know, to a point that, you know, I don't want to lie to anyone. Zuma has become, you know, for me, I'm sorry to have to say this, but, you know, he has become this beast. I cannot look at his pictures. I cannot look at that man anymore. You know, it was each time I look at Zuma, you know what, that thing comes up again, that, you know what, this man knew about, you know what, things that, you know what, he could have stopped, you know. I can't look at Zuma. I can't. You know, it was a man that, you know what, I respected so much. You know what, it was a man that, you know what, I looked forward to even see him on TV. But no, I can't. I can't see him. You know what, he has, you know what, you know, I said to myself, how can a man that, you know, I trusted so much, you know, might have known all these years that, you know what, about who was going to kill my husband, you know what, I don't know. But I don't want to see that man. I don't care about him, you know what. You know, I saw people, you know, at the airport to embrace him and things like that. You know, for me, my God, forgive me. But you know what? He can die any moment. He can drop dead any moment. You know what? I have no feelings for him. You know, even that he's sick, I don't care if he's sick. I don't even believe that he's sick anymore because, you know what? I hate him. You get my point? You know, from that day, I hate that man. I don't want to see him. You know, he infiltrated a pain on top of the pain that I had. Because, you know, I trusted him so much. Why should I trust? Who should I trust?
Do you at all think that he could probably help with that process of closure? That process of, because you're saying that you want to know the last moments of your husband. What exactly? Do you think that he'd be able to assist you with that?
You know, I don't think I can even trust him anymore. I don't think I can trust him anymore. I don't think that, you know what he did on that day, you know what, you know, there's so many questions now in my mind.
What are those questions?
You know what, was he also like Nanik? Because, you know what, let me tell you something, you know what, I spoke with him about Nanik, with Zuma, when he was a chief rep in Mozambique. I spoke about to him about Nanik, of the thing that happened when the cock came to my house, you know. And few days, because after that I was moved to a house of a comrade, a Swazi comrade. And I was going to one of my Portuguese, Mozambican family friend. And I saw Nanik on a powder blue Ford Fiesta. And with white guys, you know. And they even turned and came back and passed me very slow. And I told my husband, I told this woman that, you know what, this woman, you know what, I saw her with my own eyes. She was not a powder blue Ford Fiesta with boas. But you know what, did they take her for question? No. He himself, you know, when I spoke with him, he allowed her to go back to Swaziland. And that was what? That was December 96, you know?
Yeah.
That was December 96. In July, my husband is dead, you know?
Sure, lots of questions.
You know, this is what, you know what, since that day, now, you know, all these questions come to me that, you know what, was he not? You know what? You know what? And no one can tell me that, you know what, you know, only God can give me this answer. Or maybe, you know what, the apartheid, you know, like the Clerk, like, what do you call it, the Cock and others, maybe they can come out. Because, you know what, I think the only solution for us is for the white the former apartheid regime people, you know, to have the guards, because they are the ones who know. They're the ones that can tell us that, you know what, Carla was an enemy agent, John was an enemy agent. They're the one who have, you know, because I don't think that, you know what, anyone from the ANC side that, you know, worked with the Boers can come out today and say, I worked for them. The only thing that I can ask is for the Cock, it's for the Clerk, and for others, you know what, that we see, you know what, to come and help us, because they're the only one that can give us the closure, you know what, to come and say to me, yes, Carla, you know what, your husband was killed not only by us, but by the help of so and so and so and so. Yeah. Because, you know what, that's what was happening, you know what? And it's not only my husband that died, it's not, you know what, it's so many other people that, you know what, they were given on a silver platter, you know. They're the only one that can come and help me. Because, you know, I don't think the ANC ones will ever help me, because, you know, they'll never come and tell me the truth.
Ma'am Carla, thank you so much for making time for us.
Welcome.
And thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And being as vulnerable as you are at the moment.
Thank you.
Hopefully one day those answers will arrive and you and your family will find solace.
I don't know.
Really appreciate it.
It's been too long. It's been too long. And with the division in the ANC, that, you know what, another thing that, you know what, this is another thing that gives me even more pain when I see that, you know what, people are killing the only thing, you know, the only thing that, you know what, I hold so dear to it, because it's the only thing that, you know, I know that, you know, my husband died at the age of 32 for it. Yeah. And you see them just destroying the only thing that he died for. And I say, I hope wherever he is, he's resting in peace. Because, you know, he was so young, and for what? Dying for what? That's what sometimes I ask. But, you know what? I get another voice tells me that, you know what, it's what he loved.
Certainly. I think that's the story of many, many, many South Africans. Really appreciate your time. The end of that particular heartfelt conversation, but when we come back, we go even deeper into what it means when we speak about human rights violations, and as you've just seen as well right now, that the ripple effects thereof and how it destabilizes families, just after this. There was a time when Africa was the face of conflict and poverty on mainstream media. While conflict persists in some parts, others on the continent are now on the mend, living in the aftermath of layered and complicated violent histories. The image of the continent has evolved, but that doesn't mean all is well.
Africa has for a long time carried the tag, a continent at war with itself. Over the last decade, countries like Egypt, Libya, Sudan, the DRC and Somalia have suffered conflict, and in most cases, the fighting is still ongoing. Now a new threat is emerging.
There are areas where we are going to have to focus in this year. One is Liberia. And the reason why I mentioned Liberia is because we declared victory. We said that we had been able to bring stability. We also had a UN peacekeeping mission that shut down, and it's gone back to being managed by a resident coordinator. And of course, we have a cooperation framework where we are looking to continue to support the country. But anybody who has followed developments recently will know that there is a crisis. And therefore, if we are talking about silencing the guns, then we really have to be a bit more constructive in making sure that we prevent further deterioration before it happens. And then on Somalia, because AMISOM is, as a matter of fact, one of the longest partnerships between the African Union and the United Nations on peace and security. And there has been a lot of, I think, misinformed discussion about AMISOM's operations coming to an end at the end of 2020, which has not been stated either by the AU Peace and Security Council or the UN Security Council, but rather comes out of the discussions on the transitional plan.
More than 2/3 of the issues in the Security Council are African-related conflicts. Avoidable conflicts, in our view, conflicts such as Boko Haram, conflicts in the Central African Republic, Libya, which is probably the mother and father of all the problems of peace and security that we have in Africa today. Its effect to the north through the Mediterranean is to unleash the forces of uncontrolled migration of our youth, seeking an El Dorado, seeking a non-existent El Dorado in an Europe which does not want them. And to the south, as a result of the problems which came arising from the breaking down of the states in Libya, it has put pressure on our Sahelian states, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and even Cote d'Ivoire.
Young people are part of the vulnerable groups in times of conflict. Ironically, Africa's population is dominated by youth. Some of them are already raising their voice against any conflict that threatens a decent future for them.
If we are really talking about young people, participating, all the countries that have been mentioned, CAR, DRC, Liberia, South Sudan, my question is, how many young people were involved in the peace process? It's easy to say youth are picking the guns, they are the violent, they are a negative number, they are the unemployed, the migrants, the displaced. But how many of young people are actually part of the peace process? How many of them are part of the negotiation? And we don't want you to pass the torch to us. We want you to pass the truth. And the truth will not be possible until we are deciding for our future, hand in hand with you. We want to co-lead with you.
The UN believes Africa needs to act with urgency and ride on the gains achieved so far.
We need to see those words jump off the pages and become a reality in people's lives. We don't want for solutions or for knowing what the problem is. And maybe one of the things that I would say today is of urgency is that many of the gains that we've had in terms of making peace need to be consolidated and sustained. And we heard just earlier on when SRSG Hanatete talked about Liberia. It is one of many countries, this country, Sudan, as we look to what the international community has wanted to see for many years, and that is a change in the leadership so that people would benefit from their rights and their needs. That happens, then we need to step up and we need to be seen helping to bridge that, bridge those transitions and make sure that we prevent any further slide.
Africa aspires to achieve a conflict-free continent by the end of 2020. This ambition also aims to prevent genocide and rid the continent of wars, violent conflicts, human rights violations, and humanitarian disasters. Nomapolani, SABC News.
Peace is here in Juba, and it will spread to all corners of our country in South Sudan. Those are the words of the president of Africa's youngest country, Salva Kiir. The remarks came this past weekend after President Kiir sworn in political rival Riek Machar as part of a peace deal, but will it last, especially amid a report by the United Nations Human Rights Council that there must be justice for the thousands of people killed and displaced in the 6-year-long civil war. For more on this, we are now joined by Yasmin Suka, the chairperson of the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan. Good evening.
Good evening.
From a very heavy conversation that we had earlier on, yet another one. And it is about human rights being placed at the center of this inquiry.
Thank you very much for having me here. And as I listened to your earlier guest, I was struck by the fact that 26 years down the line, there are so many thousands of people in South Africa who have yet to find closure and really healing, but also the notion of how it affects the next generation. Because I think we heard so eloquently about the intergenerational trauma, and that really is a lesson for us that in many ways, while South Africa chose the process of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, it was really premised on the notion that a generous offer that if you came forward and you made full disclosure about the crimes you had been implicated in, then of course you would receive amnesty. But I think, the quid pro quo of that was that if you did not apply for amnesty, or if amnesty was refused, then of course the law should have followed its course and you should have been prosecuted. And 16 years after the Commission handed in its final reports, for many, many families, and you can see that in the inquests which are taking place, Timor inquest, which went in 2016, the current Agate inquest, we're going to start another one in April. There's a big question around the role of our democratic state and why it took so long for these cases to come to the fore. And of course, this is a question for the region. Can you ever have peace without criminal accountability? I would say that when people speak about peace first and justice afterwards, what we need to say to them is that these are two sides of the same coin. They're mutually reinforcing. You cannot have the one without the other. And when you look at the kind of conflicts that have taken place in our region, what is very clear is that impunity for these mass atrocity crimes, I would call them, has become entrenched. And the only way in which you're going to begin to eradicate a sense of impunity is if you begin to indict those who have what I call command responsibility for these crimes. And if we send that kind of message, this will have a deterrent effect on those who continue to commit such crimes.
But isn't it that during the time of committing these crimes, in the name of I'm doing it for my people, that the perpetrators see absolutely nothing wrong, because in their eyes, I'm doing it for my people. And in the report, for instance, that you have published, speaking about young people being recruited as well to be part of these militia groups.
What we've said about the conflict in South Sudan is that what's very clear, it's about, political gains linked to ethnic rivalry. And of course, the prize for the taking is to hold a position in government and in that way to have ethnic supremacy. And of course, some of and this is why, when you look at what has held up the peace agreement for such a long time, it was a question of how many states will there be in South Sudan? What kind of administrative boundaries will we draw? But another issue is, of course, the question of security, the fact that you need to demobilize all of those who have been part of these militias, and of course, part of both the opposition forces and government forces, and create a unified army. But in the process of getting there, what we have seen in the last year is that, in fact, there's been an intensification of the forcible recruitment, not only of children, but also adult men who don't want to fight. 2 weeks ago, I myself went up to Bentiu, which is in Unity State, and I went to speak to one of the commanders about the forcible recruitment of more than 65 children, which I knew had been taken to the cantonment site. And I reminded the commander, I said to him, I know that they've been moved because we have insiders who have told us that these youngsters were here. But I would like to remind you that this is a crime under international law and under international humanitarian law, and you as the commander, you will have command responsibility, because one of the things we are doing is we're documenting this, we're collecting the evidence, and one day, if there ever is a hybrid court set up for South Sudan, you will be one of those people who have been indicted for the crime of forcible recruitment, because the damage to the country is about the next generation. These are children who are already brutalized and who have been living in conflict for more than 16 years. And now, of course, they're forced to take part again in conflict. And so this must come to an end. You know, the forcible recruitment of children is considered to be one of the 6 most grave violations under international law. And for that, commanders must bear responsibility.
There must be accountability.
Yeah, there must be accountability.
On that note, and before we get into the transition and what that transition should look like, let's just quickly look at this insert that was compiled by my colleague Sarah Kimani.
From rebel leader to first vice president. Although not a first for Dr. Riek Machar and South Sudan, mediators to the peace agreement that led to the formation of the Transitional Government of National Unity are cautiously optimistic that this time the peace will hold.
Now the time for them to use their mental guns and not physical guns is now in order to heal the nation and develop the newest African, the newest country in the world, the Republic of South Sudan.
Years of conflict have left the country's economy on its knees and a population on the brink of starvation, leaving donors no option but to remain engaged in the country. Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta's special envoy to South Sudan says this includes using the carrot and stick method to ensure the leaders remain committed to lasting peace.
We need to meet Southern Sudanese halfway. They are busy forming their government. We also want the international community to support them. The moment they impose sanctions on leaders, that is a negative energy. That's negative energy. So we hope again these sanctions regimes will be dealt away with as soon as they demonstrate goodwill, proper governance, the rule of law, adherence to the rule of law. Then sanctions should also disappear.
The 2018 peace agreement proposes the formation of a hybrid court to hold to account those accused of committing atrocities during the 6-year war. But will this affect the country's fragile peace?
That must be a very contentious subject if our own experience here as a country is anything to go by. And yet it has to be dealt with. I know that on the 15th of next month, they have called for a national dialogue conference, and we want to be able to encourage them. You know, the example South Africa, when they had to look at the history, what is it that hurt them over the years, the apartheid years, and they had to deal with that. Open discussion where citizens can weep for injustice admitted against their fellow human beings. It's important that we delve into those issues. It is never helpful to brush them aside. So if they wrote that in the agreement, which is true, hybrid courts to see who was responsible for what killing, I think is important. But I think of greater importance is the commitment to have national dialogue around these issues.
The hybrid court is the most viable option for justice and accountability, and I think one thing we need to disabuse ourselves of as the world and South Sudanese leaders themselves more specifically is the idea that justice and peace are somehow mutually exclusive.
At least 400,000 people have been killed in the 6-year conflict and millions are displaced inside the country as well as in neighboring countries. Sarah Kimani, SABC News, Kenya.
And listening to that report there from Sarah Kimani, and she speaks about an economy being on its knees, the hybrid court, should the hybrid court solely look at just the human rights violation at the point of the displacement of people, the killings of people, the sexual violations, or should it also be looking into the economic crimes that have been committed?
If you read our report, and I think you will see that for the first time a commission of inquiry of the kind that we have has begun to look at the question of economic crimes. And in fact, we deal quite specifically with the way in which the resources of South Sudan have been diverted from where it should be used to really enable the government to support basic services in the country. We point out that in the period last year, more than 80% of the non-oil revenues were in fact diverted from government accounts. And in fact, what we have encouraged is the Legal Office of the African Union, as they prepare the statute for the hybrid court, to actually include the question of economic crimes. In our report, we make the point that in fact, more than 6.2 million people in the country are food insecure. And this is really for two reasons. On the one hand, you have starvation pursued as a deliberate strategy, which we call a crime against humanity, because it is a tactic that has been used in the warfare to deprive one or the other side of access to what we would call indispensable objects, which you need for your survival. We've seen that both sides have used this tactic by preventing humanitarian aid from reaching communities, of course, if that's a community on the other ethnic side. A second issue we have said is that the looting of the resources of South Sudan by government officials is a crime that must be punished, because this too is the diversion of huge amounts of money, millions actually, that could be used for the benefit of South Sudanese. So this is the first time that you see a commission prepare a report on the economic crimes. This is going to touch quite a sore area, because what we've also said in the report is that you have a predatory elite who are looting the country of its resources. And unless this issue is addressed by the new unity government, I'm afraid you're going to see South Sudan not change at all. This is an important component of the peace agreement, and we think there must be accountability for that as well.
At least in the report, the report is quite clear that the state resources have been looted by government officials. So which means these will be government officials under the presidency of Salva Kiir. Has the presidency at all, or the president himself, conceded that indeed these crimes have been committed, and whether or not it was done under his watch or under his instruction?
Well, that's always, I think, the million-dollar question. The government of South Sudan received our report early in February, and in fact they have the opportunity to comment. While we met with the government while we were in South Sudan, I think what they raised, why are we looking at these issues? They felt that this was not really within our mandate. And we pointed out that the deprivation of access to socio-economic rights is part of our mandate. And in that context, we've looked at these financial outflows and the diversion of the resources, which we think are important issues to build on. And so I expect that when we go to the Council on the 10th of March, you will see the government responding to these allegations. You've also heard, I think, the envoy from Kenya talk about sanctions. Of course, what we should be saying is that the quid pro quo for lifting sanctions should be the establishment not only of the hybrid court, but also the Commission on Truth, Healing and Reconciliation and the Compensation and Reparations Authority. That's the sort of, that reason will give people confidence actually to invest in South Sudan.
And when we speak about these reparations, one of the questions that stuck out for me was the proliferation of heavy weapons.
Yes.
Who supplied them?
Well, that's quite interesting. We deal with that quite extensively in our report. We actually make the point that when you look at the way in which the conflict has morphed from a national level to a localized conflict in which cattle raiding is one expression of that. In the past, this would be skirmishes between different ethnic groups, the pastorals, the agriculturalists, as people move their cattle. But more and more what we've noted and documented in our report is that in fact the cattle usually is linked to a high-ranking politician, county commissioner or governor. And of course what they are supplying is heavy artillery. Why would a cattle keeper need an RPG rifle or mortar mounted on a truck? When you look at the proliferation of that kind of weapons, you ask yourself the question, can you imagine the level of casualties? But what you have now are many conflicts where there's been an escalation of more than 50% in the number of casualties, but all of this is happening at state level.
Are there any outside countries, outside influence, and also with the supply of these weapons? Because that, for me, remains the biggest question. Where are these weapons coming from?
Well, clearly South Sudan has incredibly porous borders. You know, we haven't really looked at which of the countries are supplying the arms to South Sudan. But one of the questions that have been raised by many of the activists in the region is what role the regional, you know, the countries in the East African region are playing in terms of themselves being implicated in fueling or allowing the conflict to carry on.
Should the president also appear before this hybrid court or the TRC-styled commission of inquiry?
Well, the president will only appear before the hybrid court if the president is indicted on either a crime against humanity or a war crime. Because remember, the hybrid court will be to deal with those who bear the greatest responsibility. But I would certainly argue that when the Commission on Truth, Healing and Reconciliation is established, not only the president, but all the members of the opposition parties should be appearing as well. And this example has been set by many leaders across the region who have had to appear before their country's own commissions, truth commissions. In our country, you had the president, the former president appear, as well as the president of the ANC and of different political parties. So this is an important step in the accountability process, the acknowledgement of what has actually happened in the country.
Just quickly, in 30 seconds perhaps, how do you do it to make sure that you don't have a situation that we have in South Africa where you have the likes of Mamkhala Mudau saying that justice has not prevailed?
It's to make sure that justice and accountability are prioritized by the parties in South Sudan.
Okay, thank you so much, Yasmin.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. And we'll have to see exactly how this will unfold and whether the African Union itself will also be applying pressure. Appreciate your time. Well, before we end the show, we'd like to state that we'll give those who were mentioned on our first interview with Khala Mudau a right of reply. Thank you so much for watching African Perspective with me, Aldrin St. Pierre. We're back again next week, Wednesday. Goodbye.